You know, when you're a teenager, you might think that when you're alone in your bedroom with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, you're finally able to get away from your family. Well, you're wrong. If someone says, "Who are you?" you're going to say, "I." You know who you are, and you're very familiar with yourself. You've been around for as long as you can remember. But how far can you remember? Well, for most of us, we can remember things back until we were about, I don't know, 5 or 6. But those years before that are mostly a mystery. But in fact, a lot was happening there. Well, what was happening there? Who was I in those 4 or 5 or 6 years before I can really remember stuff? Well, according to Freud, it's in those early years that, in fact, the most formative and powerful things were happening to you. And that's where you really became I. But at that time, you weren't really an I in the sense you are now. The thing you have to think about then is what it's like to be a little wee baby. When you have a little child who's, recently been born, it's not sitting around saying, "I am John and I do this, that, the other thing," right? The child doesn't have that kind of experience. That child is really brand new to the world of experiencing things. And that child doesn't have the same kind of frame of reference that you have, doesn't have the highly developed bodily functioning that you have. Remember, it can't even walk, right? Can't even really grab things. So Freud says that empirical observation shows that for the little child, the main form its experience takes, the most important form its experience takes, is sucking milk at the breast, or the equivalent in children who don't breastfeed. But that means the biggest experience it has is coming from its mouth, and the way through its mouth it connects with this thing, typically the breast of the mother, and that experience is the thing that really satisfies its desires, right? Children get hungry and thirsty and lonely and whatever else. And if you have a little child, you'll see how much it is fixed on that experience and how powerful and important it is. Well, that, Freud says, is what that little child has instead of your I, right? That's where the child is, basically. That's where the child is happening, basically. And so that initial experience of the ability to sort of grasp the world orally is where our experience really begins. And what do you grasp orally? Well, a whole bunch of things at the same time. Of course, you get the food from the mother's milk that gets rid of hunger. It also presumably tastes nice. It's probably nice and warm. And also, you're bonding with your mother there. And so that experience that we grow out of is that experience of bonding, trust, and dependency with, parent, mother typically. And that experience channeled through our sense of the mouth, right? That's where Freud's most powerful insight comes from. The idea that our personality grows out of these connections that are simultaneously bodily and interpersonal. Right? We have this founding experience of trust and dependency, and that's an oral experience. At a later stage, when you're 2 or something like that, you're going to get out of diapers and you're going to have to learn how to use the toilet yourself, right? And one of the things that means is you have to control your bowel movements. And Freud says that's then the second really big transformative stage of childhood development, because that's where the child is responsible for doing things right or wrong. Like, they don't want you to make a mess on the bathroom floor. They want you to poop in the toilet. So it's an experience of responsibility. It's also a kind of experience of something like ego, because you can feel proud that you're doing that thing right that you're supposed to do, just as you can feel ashamed if you do it wrong. It's also an experience of control. You are gaining fuller control of your body and able to do things, right? It's an experience of agency. You can also use that to be mean, because your parents want you to do a certain thing, but you can say, "No, I'm going to do that other thing," right? So you can take out your aggression there. So that second big stage in our development, which Freud calls the anal stage, is the stage where we're really grappling with agency and independence. It's quite different from that initial grappling with trust and dependency. And in this case, too, that personal and interpersonal set of issues are closely related with particular bodily experiences. And then the third big stage of early childhood development, in that area we can't really remember once we're actually fully developed persons, is what he calls the phallic stage. And that's where children discover, 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there, they start to discover that, the world is really meaningfully defined in terms of the difference between men and women. And mostly, the men have the power, the women have to do something else. But the child discovers the way our world operates around these kinds of sex roles, and indeed those huge interpersonal and social roles are again associated with specific parts of the body, right? The men are the ones with the penises, they're the ones who are in charge, and they have all these other things associated with them. And so the child then has to learn about itself. Oh, I guess I'm going to have to figure out how I belong to that thing. And so the child, it's that third stage is when the child is going to really start to develop its sense of its gender identity based again on its experience of these adults and how they deal with those roles and its experience of its own body. So, those are all hugely important parts of development. They're all deeply interpersonal things, and they're all specifically associated with parts of the body. And the thing is, you can go through that well or poorly. If in those developmental stages things are happening poorly, you're going to carry scars. And those scars are going to be embedded in the way you experience those aspects of your body and those aspects of interpersonal life. As you become that I we were talking about, you become that on the basis of these deeply embedded meanings in your experience of what it is to use your mouth, what it is to use the toilet, what it is to have these kinds of genitals. And as an I, you carry forward those meanings and those associations in your behavior, in the way you make sense of things, without remembering it, without being aware of it, right? Where do those things show themselves? They show themselves in your sexual behavior, right? How you identify yourself sexually, what kinds of people you want to have sex with, what you want to do with them. They're going to be reflected in your dreams, right? Your dreams are going to put on display those meanings that sort of really underlie your psychological life. Again, even though you don't really know about them. They're going to be reflected in neurotic behaviors, in phobias, in eating disorders, in sleep disorders, and so on. Right? Freud's point is that these things in our adult life are really the ways we display how well or poorly our upbringing was handled by the important people around us. And we carry the scars of troubled upbringing in the very way we live out our bodies and our desires and so on. So the point is, we all have a secret story. We all carry our families around with us in our bodies. And if, as is the case with most of us, some aspects of that are not so healthy, then really what you need to do is go through that kind of therapy whereby you go back and figure out what those things are that you're not really remembering.